All right. So everybody, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate it. Please subscribe, like, and share on any one of the platforms that you're listening to us. Again, we appreciate that. And it means a lot because we're trying to get these interviews out to as many people as possible. So really appreciate those subscriptions, the shares, and obviously the likes because they get it out to more people. We have Meghan Smith Brooks on, and she is the author of Unraveling. I almost messed it up, Megan. I apologize. So she is the author of Unraveling Grief. She's also a grief coach, a spiritual educator, a speaker, and a retreat facilitator. And again, this is Meghan Smith Brooks. Definitely check out the book. She also has two websites, and I'm just going to read this out just for people that if they want to check more into her. It is www.unityawakeningways.org or unravelingthegrief.com, which is what the book is about. We're going to talk about the book and a lot of other things since our time right now is so crazy, Megan, as you know, too. There's a lot on this topic to discuss. So I appreciate your time for that today. And also, thanks so much for coming on. This is really what people need to hear and listen to.
Well, thank you, Rob. I appreciate the opportunity, and I agree. It's absolutely something to bring out into our conversations in a more empowering and open way, because grief tends to be something people want to avoid or just get over it.
So let's start off and talk about this. Reading up on you myself, and I'm gonna let you talk about this and not me go into a ramble on this, but reading about you myself, you have really quite a story about some really painful things that happened to you in your life. If you just want to start off and tell the viewers a little bit about you and about that story in general as we go right into the interview.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Grief is something that touches all of us. We can't avoid it in life. It's pain and loss. It's a part of our human experience. But nobody prepares us for those really emotionally traumatic losses, when it's the emotional loss of a loved one. And it can just slam us like a tsunami and knock us out of our body. And that's really what happened to me in 2013. I'm a minister. I was serving a spiritual community. I was on my way traveling across country to attend an annual conference. Was going to be a cruise at sea with 600 colleagues. And I had my cell phone turned off, and I turned it on when I got to baggage claim in Fort Lauderdale. And my older son, I have two sons, was calling me immediately. He says, "Mom, I've been trying to call you all day. Are you sitting down?" When somebody says that, oh my God, this is not going to be easy news. And so it's like, what? And he says, "I don't know how to tell you this, but Justin's gone." Now it's my second born son. And what do you mean he's gone? He goes, "Mom, they found his body in a river." And I'm like, "Well, what happened? We don't know what happened to him. We don't know if he drowned. We don't know what happened." And so I'm just, I immediately go into shock of hearing that, because your mind goes to denial. It's like, wait, that's not what you said. That can't possibly be true. I've been trying to call him. I haven't been able to reach him, but, they had to have made a mistake. And so that was the beginning of a journey of trying to embrace something that my mind could not comprehend or process or want to accept. And strategically along the way, found out that he not only had been found in a river, but his body had been wrapped in a heavy chain attached to a cinder block and thrown in, and that the coroner's report verified that he'd been shot. So this was an intentional act of violence. He was murdered. And that reality, again, it's like, we see all of the news reports in the media, the mass shootings, coronavirus deaths, and the tragedy of life. And I was in the midst of my own nightmare. As a spiritual leader and somebody that had a foundation, I realized that I was grateful that I had some practices that I had been supporting others with, but it's a very different situation when you have to apply it to yourself. Grief is personal. It's different for everyone. And I literally felt like I'd been knocked out of my body. And I was just for months, just kind of walking around like I was observing the world around me in this nightmare that I couldn't close my eyes because every time I did, I imagined what had happened to my son. And at some point, I had to realize that I can't let this destroy me. I have to find a way to take baby steps to move forward.
So I want to ask you this just to go back a little bit into your son's murder. So I know you kind of gave the graphic story of what happened. Was there any other information that was found out why he was murdered? Was it just the wrong place, wrong time? Was it something like to that?
Well, it's like, I learned a lot about the judicial system, more than I ever wanted to know.
Yeah.
Working with the detective, there was very little evidence, obviously when you're in water. And so, the beginning of the process, I found that little opportunities of gratitude, because the thing is that he'd been thrown into this river that emptied into a very deep lake. And the detective had said, if his body had made it to that lake, we may never have found him. But there had been really heavy rain and his body got caught up in some debris and a fisherman found him. And I'm like, it would have been so much worse if I'd never known what happened to him. They just disappeared. So in the process of gathering information, it took about 18 months and they finally arrested two individuals, young men. One of them was 19 and he totally freaked out when he was arrested, realizing he could be facing life in prison. And so he started to share information. And what we discovered added another level of it's like the denial of the reality of it is that my son's father-in-law, who he did not get along with, they had a very difficult relationship. My son was somebody that didn't mince words. He called things as it was, and that wasn't always welcome. His father-in-law had paid these guys to get rid of him.
Wow.
My son had a 5-year-old daughter, and that was the core of some issues. He was, it wasn't a really healthy relationship with my granddaughter's mother, and he wanted to leave. He struggled with alcoholism, and he wanted to get his life on track, and he needed to leave, but he didn't want to leave his daughter. So there was all this stuff going on, and the father-in-law just had huge issues. And that reality has also caused a breach in my ability to have a relationship with my granddaughter because she's living with the family that's responsible for her father's death.
Yeah.
Ultimately, after 2 years, there was plea bargaining and the two men are in prison. I'm grateful we didn't have to go through a trial. But it's kind of still an ongoing situation because the evidence to prove who was ultimately responsible was destroyed. And the legal system doesn't operate on we arrest somebody and then hope we can prove them guilty. They want to know that the evidence will prove it, and they're not going to go through the process and the time and the money and the effort if there's no evidence to convict.
So and I appreciate you for telling that story. I know it was probably extremely hard for you to say that, especially on the air to me and everybody else that's listening. So with the father-in-law that basically, I know the two men murdered your son, of course, and they did the act, but he was kind of the culprit in finding these people. And I'm just wondering, maybe you can go elaborate more into this. Why is he not in prison also? Because there's got to be some way that they could get him on this, obviously, because he hired these two men. If he didn't do that, then there would have been none of this.
Exactly, the lack of evidence. The only evidence is this younger man who told the story. And because he's basically a convicted criminal, they're not going to try to go to a jury trial to arrest somebody to convict them when there's no physical evidence, because it had been 18 months between the time of finding my son's body and the time that they arrested these men and started to be able to piece the details together. They had actually arrested him at one point, but because of the lack of evidence, he was released.
Hmm.
So that's one of those things that is like, I had to learn that I have no control over this situation. And yes, it makes me angry. And yes, it can really mess with your mind.
Right.
Um, but it's like, I don't have control over it. So I'm not going to let it dominate my life, my thoughts, and destroy me. I don't want to live with that kind of anger and that kind of unforgiveness. So um, I don't know what may happen. At the same time, my granddaughter is caught up in the middle of this. She's now 14 and has no idea the truth behind the loss of her father. And, when I've talked to the detectives and they said, we know he's guilty. This other young man's, he got paid. They were told the plan of how to try to get rid of the body so that he wouldn't be found. I mean, the level of just the planning
Yeah, the
behind the
thought
scene,
behind it, right.
the disregard for human life, it's nauseating. But there's nothing I can do about it. And
Hmm.
that's how the legal system works. They can know somebody's guilty, but if they don't have evidence, they don't follow up.
Gosh, that's extremely tragic story. Wow. Anyways, we'll move on a little bit as far as that goes. For people again that are listening, and we hope you share, like, and push this out to different people. Subscribe because this is an important story. Again, Meghan Smith Brooks. She's going to be talking about her book, Unraveling Grief, again, and she just, as you people have heard, she's come out with a really tragic story. We're going to get a little bit into that, but get into the book. You know, I don't know if you've done this, but I know we talked in email. But my question is, have you forgiven these two men that were paid off to do this? Because I've had issues in my past where people have done not as crazy and psychotic things as they've done to your family, but they've done some mean things, and we've all had that in our lives. And it's really tough for us to forgive people when they've done mean things to our family or even ourselves. So, how have you forgiven these people? And if you have, how did you get to that spot? And how can you tell the audience to get to these spots if they've had, something like, your story, or even, something to a lesser degree happen to them?
Well, that's a really important question. And again, as I've been a spiritual educator since 1995, so I had a foundation of working with forgiveness is an important practice, I think, for all of us. And so what I realized is that when you look at forgiveness, it's not about letting the other person off the hook. It's about, because everything is energy, and there's this intense energy that you hold on to when you're angry and unforgiving. And it's about letting go of that energy so it doesn't destroy me. There's an old Buddhist story that talks about unforgiveness is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I don't want to, it's toxic to our system. So, and from an intellectual perspective, I can say, it's important that I go through the process of letting go of my anger and my unforgiveness, my resentment, all of those negative things, so that it's not dragging me down, and trusting the legal system. Or it's like, I'm not responsible for the other person's decisions or the consequences of their actions, but there are consequences, and they are going to have to live with the consequences of their actions.
Right.
And so that's where we let go of it. It's like, because I think there's this psychological thought that if I forgive somebody, I'm letting them off the hook. And that's not the truth.
Move forward with that. Again, for people that are just listening, this is Meghan Smith Brooks. She is the author of Unraveling Grief, also a grief coach, a spiritual educator, a speaker and retreat facilitator. Again, if you want to learn more about her, two websites to look at, too. One is about the book, which is unravelinggrief.com. And then the other one is unitedawakeningways.org. As we keep going into the interview, Meghan, I want to talk about this. what made you want to go into this profession? Because it is a profession that we all need, of course, but it is quite depressing at times.
Yeah. Um, there's, deep sorrow and sadness that I can resonate, empathetically with others in their midst of loss. And I think, though, for me, because I had already had made a choice in life when I became a minister and was serving spiritual communities and began to educate myself with spiritual philosophy, it's about um, a way of living. And how can we learn and grow and evolve and find ways that support us in positive ways? And so for me, it was about, how do I support others? I really want to encourage people with something that is useful, and challenge them at the same time to make the changes in their life to make a difference. So I started from that place. And then when my son died, and because of how he died, and I went through my own process of healing through grief, I noticed how other people responded to me, around me, the discomfort that they have with dealing with grief. People are uncomfortable with other people's grief because it reminds them of their own. And so they want you to hurry up and get over it. And yet it's a process. And the thing is that grief doesn't ever go away. It just kind of changes in how we have come to learn to live with it and accept it as a part of who we are. And it will be triggered again. So I started to realize that we don't do a good job of talking about it in our culture. Yes, there are resources initially, but then what? How do we use it to move forward in more meaningful ways? And so I realized that there was a lot of information that I could use that was helpful, and I was called to shift from doing just general ministry work to doing grief work. And I became a certified grief coach, and I just had to write out my story. I got to the point where if I didn't write my book just for myself, it was something that needed to get out of me. And so it's evolved. And I support people because I want people to know that we can move forward without letting grief destroy us, that we can move beyond survival, we can thrive as a result of it.
So can you talk about the book and really what it's about as far as that to the viewers?
Sure. I should have brought this up, but I wanted to share a little piece that I wrote. Actually, I went to the first parole hearing of the one member of the defendant that had murdered my son, the one that shared the information, and he wasn't given a minimum number of years before parole in exchange for sharing some information. So it was kind of surprising when he came up for parole, but I was given the opportunity to write him a letter and share it to him. He was on a big screen in another room. He wasn't where I was. And I used it in the introduction of my book because I wanted to share, it's like the very raw feelings that I started with. And to know that it's like, I'm not just saying this is easy stuff. This is deep, hard work, but it serves a purpose. And so what I said to this young man is, I'm still grieving my son's loss as if it happened yesterday. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him, wish I could hear his voice, see his smile, or hold him in my arms. My heart will never stop hurting for his physical presence. My world has been forever changed. A bright part of my life is forever extinguished. I wanted him to know that. I have come to realize that the grief I feel will never go away, but becomes something I just learned to live with. There are days that I realize that it makes me really angry, that I should not have to learn to live with this loss. I should not have to look at his picture and remember that I will never see him in the physical reality ever again. I ache for him every year on his birthday, every Christmas, when I see someone who looks like him or something that reminds me of him. On the anniversary of his death, I'm taken back to the day his brother called and said, "Mom, Justin is gone. They found his body in the river." And my heart stopped. That's where I started. And that's where I began with my book. We've all been in a place where we didn't think we could breathe again. And yet that's how we begin to heal, is to
Mhm.
learn how to breathe again.
What do you hope people learn from this interview and from the book, Megan?
I think one of the things that's most important is the greater awareness that grief serves us in life. It does not diminish who we are, it enhances who we are. And so it's time for us to embrace it, not to avoid it, but to go into the mystery of all that life is. There's a place that I now feel that I can appreciate because I've experienced sorrow. And since my son died, um, my sister took her life by suicide just before Thanksgiving last year. My mother, who has had dementia, and it's been a very difficult process, just passed away 11 days ago. So,
Jeez.
so it's like the murder of my son was horrific. It was heart-wrenching. It's one of the most traumatic things I've ever experienced, and yet loss continues to happen in life. So don't let it destroy you. Reach out to find the support that can help you move through when you're tender and raw initially, but also begin to say, how I live moving forward now will be how I honor that love that now has changed form, and it's not in the physical, but always in my heart. Those treasured memories in my relationship will always be there, and I can live with that.
If they want to find more about you and get the book, Megan, I assume they can get it at the Unraveling Grief website. Anything else they can find more about you and follow you, maybe on social media, whatever it may be, besides obviously the two websites that we've been repeating throughout the interview?
Yes, my book is on Amazon in
Mhm.
paperback and Kindle form. I've recorded an audio version, which I hope can be released sometime soon. There's an editing issue. Um, but you can find me on Facebook under Megan Smith Brooks. I also have two other pages, one for Unity Awakening Wage, which is my alternative ministry where I offer spiritual education and embracing Grief to Thrive is an online course that I offer that's interactive. I do weekly Q&A opportunities with people, and is a self-paced way that they can work through finding a way to heal grief, but to ultimately thrive and recreate our lives so that we're living our life as legacy. So I'm available to answer questions. There's contact forms on both websites. You can send your questions to me, and I'm here to support you. To really know that grief is a tragic, but it's also an incredible experience in our life reality.
Megan, thanks so much for coming on and really telling your story. I know it was hard, and I really appreciate you doing that because like I said, there's a lot of people that listen to that I'm sure they're struggling too in their own lives, and they'll hear this interview. So thanks so much, and we definitely need to have you on again because there's so much we really could really divulge into and really get into the thick of things with you about.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, and I really want to honor everyone, because moving through the holidays, I know it's a time that our grief can be triggered, and so I just want to support you in finding meaningful ways. Gather with your loved ones and appreciate that you have each other during this time.